Good morning and welcome to another exciting episode of One Path to Wealth. I'm your host, Jeremy Dicker, the Hebrew Hammer, with my co-host, Peter Hoopis, coming live to you guys here on another beautiful day. Pete, how are you, man?
I'm good. How are things there?
Always good. Always good. It feels like this has been a whirlwind of a year. Here we are coming into the last few days or weeks of the year, and I can't believe 2024 is about to be in the rear view mirror, and 2025 is here.
Yeah, tell me about it. We've got snow on the ground this morning, so woke up to a few inches of snow. I mean, winter is here. It's real.
Well, I've told you this many, many times. Once you turn the age of 18, you're allowed to move. If you're a glutton for punishment to continue to live in frigid climate, that's on you.
Yep, that is true. You got to embrace it, I guess.
I guess, man. I guess.
Well, we've got, I think, a pretty exciting and somewhat relevant topic for today. You and I are both baseball fans. There was a major contract signing just recently. And it got us thinking a little bit about, what do you do with a sudden influx of wealth? And we see it sometimes with our clients with an inheritance or selling a business or whatever it might be, right? But this baseball transaction really just got us talking about a few things. And obviously we love talking baseball, but I thought that would be a great topic for today. So I don't know if you want to, kick off some thoughts on what you're thinking as it relates to this idea of a massive influx of wealth.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Number one, I think it's arguably the worst deal in baseball history, signing Juan Soto to that kind of money. But other than the fact that he's 25,
we can get into that another time.
We certainly can. But it's very, very interesting. We've seen with our clients that inherit large blocks of money out of nowhere, where oftentimes the kids and the parents, to some degree, are really unready, not ready to have that radical change in their lifestyle. And in some situations, the lifestyle doesn't change at all. They're okay with the existing set of circumstances that played out. But in some cases, they're not. And in those cases that they're not, and interestingly, with the year coming to an end, we've had lots of these conversations around year-end gifting with our clients and things that they should be thinking about relative to their children. And then also just estate planning. When was the last time you reviewed your estate planning documents to ensure that your wishes are current and accurate and really reflect the goals that you have for your family? And as I think about that, I really think about what all that means. And initially, you have to have a budget. You've got all of this money that's coming in, and in the Soto deal, obviously it seems like it's an endless amount of money, but how many athletes do we know, or have we heard of rather, that have had these massive contracts, huge signing bonuses, and only to find themselves a few years out of retirement with nothing left? So I think it's real. I mean, no matter what the size of these big blocks of money are, there needs to be a strategy to how do you deal with all of this money that all of a sudden is hitting your checking account. And now what do? Do you go out and buy that car, buy that house? I know famously Shaquille O'Neal was one of those guys that spoke about how he met an investment advisor early in his career that said, "Hey man, what are you doing? Just because you signed this big deal, that could be your last one. And what are you doing to ensure that the money that you've made and will make will be there to stand the test of your time, let alone your kids' time, to ensure that you're not outspending and doing things that you really shouldn't do?" So some of the things that I think are important are to have really a goal and a game plan relative to how much money you're going to set aside for discretionary spending, how much money you're going to set aside for that long-term, that rainy day fund. And again, regardless of how much money you have, how much do you set aside for that? And then additionally, when you start thinking about who you'd want to benefit from this windfall, or in some cases, the windfall that you've had, do you want to ensure that the next generation continues to have and enjoy some of that financial flexibility that presented itself to you? How do you do that? And what are some of the things you should be thinking about along the way? So it's interesting. It's a very timely topic.
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of, I don't think people really think through all of that, right? I mean, that would be the natural thing. They're not thinking ahead. And we can keep this on a sports theme if we want. And the Soto deal was 15 years, which is crazy in itself, right? But say for a professional athlete, and it doesn't have to be, we can talk about a business owner, right? They get to that, let's call it the finish line, if that's what they're looking for, right? Where they finally, they have this liquidation event, they sell the business, they get the money, right? Same thing with, if you look at it with an athlete, they're getting this block of capital for something that was generated over a period of time. Now that the athlete has this future, and the business was what presumably led up to this. However, that money is what is left, let's say, assuming they don't go on to do anything else, to live on, and fund their lifestyle for the rest of their life. So now, Soto deal again is so crazy, but if you looked at his earnings, which is like $850 million is the contract, and you spread it out over 50 years, it's still a massive number. But the thought process, I think, if you following what I'm trying to say here is that money, if you spread it out over that amount of time, again, Soto deal is absurd. To take a business owner sells their business for $20 million, right? What are some of the steps that they need to do? Let's say they got there, they hit the jackpot, let's call it.
Sure.
I mean, they've got to celebrate a little, right? You've got to have some fun. You got to enjoy it, right? So, I mean, is there any guidance that you have when you've had someone in that situation before where it's like, Jeremy, we did it, man. I sold the company. You picked the number that's coming in. Give me some ideas. What can I do?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. Number one, it's setting realistic expectations. Someone gets a windfall. So let's just say they sell that business. They get this windfall of capital. Do they need to go out and buy that $10 million home, that $5 million home, that $20 million home? Because let's say, for example, you could go out and afford to buy that $10 million home. You can pay for the house. You can even furnish it. You've got taxes, maintenance, power, utilities, all these things that are going to ultimately be a drain on the balance that's left and available, that capital that's there. And let's liken it back to sports for a minute. Oftentimes when we're talking to professional athletes that are our clients or our prospective clients, what we say about investment management for those guys that are 25, let's use Juan Soto as the example. Juan, you're 25, and some investment advisors would recommend that you go ahead and invest that money a bit more aggressively because you're 25. And granted, this is a lot more money than the average deal, but let's just operate under those set of circumstances for a second. But Juan is not 25 because his career is going to be 10 or 15 years long, which means you got to treat Juan like he's 50 years old. Because average retirement, let's say, is 65. And if you're 50, if you got 15 years left in the seat earning an income. So that means that if you're 50, you're going to invest your money very differently than that 25-year-old that's got, in theory, 40 years of working time. Well, the same thing is true with blocks of capital, with money that you've earned, or you sell a business and you've got that money. If you're not planning on doing anything to generate income, if your income plan is that the capital that you've received is now what's going to be available, and that's what's going to be you. That's going to be the working enterprise of Peter Hoopis or Jeremy Dicker. Then that enterprise has to be built to provide income and resources available for the duration. And that duration could be a year, God forbid, or it could be 50 years. And so you need to be thinking about budgeting, reevaluating your priorities. Do you really need that $5 million or $10 million house? Do you need to fly private, or is first class good enough? And then beyond that, thinking about whether it's important or not for you to provide for the next generation. I was had a meeting with a very good client of ours recently, and they have a sibling who's quite a bit younger, but that sibling has not demonstrated historically the ability to really manage their money in an effective manner. And as now the patriarch and the matriarch in the family are considering what that next set of gifts are going to be going forward, the discussion really went around, well, if this sibling receives more money and it's unencumbered, there are no barriers for what that individual can use the money for, what happens if the money runs out? What happens if markets don't deliver the same kind of exciting returns that we've seen very recently? What happens if there's a tax change or an administrative change or some unforeseen circumstance that you really can't plan for? Then what does that sibling, who's a good person, but has not done all of the things that they've needed to do, they've not demonstrated that behavior, how do you protect them from themselves? And it's one of those things that you don't want to put yourself in a situation where if you're a sibling, you're becoming a parent. But I do believe it's all of our responsibilities, friends or relatives, to help each of us make better decisions about the use of money, what kind of decisions you're going to make over time, and so on. So as we think about those things, as we come in the end of the year and we start thinking about all of these things, I think it's very important to reassess what's important, what your goals and objectives are, have a budget, have that mailbox money or that rainy day money that you're going to set aside, and whatever that amount of money is, you're planning for that block of capital and you're incorporating that into your financial plan. Making sure that your spouse or other relatives, that they are in alignment with that. If you're going to have a celebration fund, Pete, to your point of a minute ago, and because you want to celebrate this immediate amazing success, okay, do that, but just don't be unreasonable about what that celebration fund should look like. And then I think lastly, and I don't think I can ever reiterate that point enough, but really start putting some reasonable expectations about what's really important and what are some of those things that you can live without.
Yeah. So what if you've got that client in this situation and they're like, look, JD, I want to buy that $5 million house. That's been the dream, the goal. And this might be a bit of a stretch. They have the money, right? And they're just like, I'm doing it, man. This is the house. I want it. It's for sale. I've got the money. I want to buy this house. And they do, right? I mean, what guidance would you give them at that point? I mean, what could you do in their overall picture to say, okay, we may have put a lot of money into this, into real estate, into your home, your personal residence? And what are some other things that you could do to say, all right, we're going to do that, but I'm going to try to protect or do some things differently with more of the money that we have available?
I think that there's a couple of pieces to that question too, Pete. So oftentimes clients will say, hey, I want to pay off my house. And I'll say, well, why? Let's talk about that. Why? Well, I just don't like to have a mortgage. Well, when you're retired or when you're thinking about any, real significant financial move, your capital and your resources become about income, not about the asset itself. So if you've got a bunch of money tied up in a piece of real estate that's your home, that you can't monetize, you live there. It's not a rental property. You're not going to sell it. Assume for a minute you're going to hang on to that house in perpetuity. Then really the money that's inside that house, if you pay off the mortgage, is dead. It's not doing anything for you. So what would you rather do? Would you rather have no mortgage and limited or less cash flow, or a mortgage that is reasonable and affordable that you can pay pretty easily, and a larger block of capital that you can do more with? Is the comfort of not having a mortgage more important than the comforts of everyday life?
Yeah.
I would argue, and in my view, the answer is it's not. I'd rather have the comfort of more income. But realizing that in our profession, oftentimes it's emotions over economics. It's emotions over those economics, because emotionally you're saying, well, I got to pay the house off. And even though economically it doesn't make sense, you're still going to pay that house off. There's nothing we can do to convince you otherwise. So oftentimes I think you need to separate the emotions around the financial decisions and really focus more on the economics of those decisions and the math.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that in anything you do, even with estate planning, gifting, oftentimes clients will align with how they grew up. So they didn't have a lot of money. They made a lot of money, and now they want to ensure that the kids don't fall prey to all of that inheritance. So they want them to grow up the same way they did. When in reality, is that really what you want? Do you want them to have to struggle and fight for every bit? Or is there some reasonable way to address it where you say, you know what, as long as you're gainfully employed, you're working really hard, you're doing all the right things, I'm going to give you that added support. If you want to be a social worker or a singer or an actress, and those kinds of positions aren't going to generate the kind of income that I would, as your father, would want you to have, I'm going to go ahead and support you doing a bit more. You know what? You don't want to go to college. You want to be the next Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or Phil Knight. We're going to go ahead and support that entrepreneurial desire and that entrepreneurial effort. And we're going to go ahead and support that with not only being there for you and being a place for you to chat and speak to, but in addition to provide you with the capital that you need within reason to do what you need to do.
Yeah.
So again, I think that as you start thinking about all of these things, you start thinking about radical amounts of money, you think about what's happening over the next 10 to 20 years, the most significant wealth transfer in world history is going to be happening. We have to consider and contemplate all those things, and it's our job to guide our clients on the right path.
Yeah, no doubt. And you mentioned emotion in there. And that's something that you've experienced so much. I mean, there's so much emotion tied to money. And I've had those same conversations as well, where you're talking about paying off the mortgage. And it's like, okay, let's walk through this. And maybe maybe not, right? But let's just talk through it. And we could, in certain situations, that there are more advantages to carrying that mortgage and things we could do with the money. And they're just like, I do not care, man.
I know.
I am paying that thing off. And it's like, I'm okay. We as long as we are clear and we understand that, right? But the emotions tied to money are so strong and powerful that has to be factored in, right? We can't just solely go on, this is the formula that we need to use, right? We have to understand where people are coming from. And there's some deep rooted stuff that's tied to it. So it's important to understand that as well.
There sure are.
A lot of times there are people involved in these transactions, right? And us as advisors are typically on that team. We try to handle as much of the financial transactions that we're capable of. But typically in these big situations, there's business managers involved. There's lots of attorneys involved.
Yeah.
Accountants, you name it, right? Friends and family. Mm-hmm. That are involved in making some of these decisions. Now, how do you coordinate that? I mean, I know, I'll just say, how do you coordinate that? Who's taking the lead? You've been in that situation numerous times. I mean, just talk me through that a little bit.
Yeah. And so here's what I would say. Number one, it depends on the relationship with the client or the individual. If we're being brought in as the financial guiders, if you will, as the financial advisor, as the whatever you want to call us, by another advisor like a business manager, we're always going to adhere to what that business manager, CPA, or attorney wants us to do. We'll give our opinion, but certainly we're being brought in, and our objective and our job is to be supportive of that individual advisor and make sure that we're working in alignment with them to get the best result for the client. The flip side of that coin, and this has happened pretty recently, you're aware of who I'm talking about, but we had a business manager that was brought in late, and this is a client of ours, of our firm, and we've been assisting that individual for a very long time and doing some great work and really got that individual in some great spots, both from a retirement perspective, education perspective, taxes, all of those good things. And we were not in alignment with this new advisor that was being brought in, so it required us to have some very challenging discussions, both with that advisor and that client, to ensure that they understood that while plans change, when we're all working together, we need to work together. It's no different than when you're on a football field. The quarterback and the wide receivers and the offensive line and the running backs all have to be in alignment. Otherwise, you're not going to win any football games. Same thing is true in baseball, my favorite sport. If your pitcher and your catcher aren't in alignment and the catcher calls curveball and the pitcher throws a fastball up and in and the catcher's not ready for it, you're going to have a result that is less than ideal. And ultimately, what our focuses are, we want our clients to win. First, last, and always, we want them to win. And that win means that emotionally they've got to be set up to succeed. We need to have that emotional roadmap, just like you have a financial or retirement or estate planning roadmap. They need to understand that emotions run high when you're talking about money. When my grandparents died on my mother's side, they had some money, not a lot, some. They had 4 kids and a bunch of grandkids, and it was an 80-20. So 80% of the assets went to the kids, and the remaining 20 went to each of the grandchildren. And they put in their estate plan that it was a round robin. So oldest to youngest, youngest to oldest, got to walk through the house twice, oldest to youngest, then youngest to oldest, and pick 1 or 2 things out of the house that they wanted. And after that, the rest of it was to be sold because they wanted to eliminate any infighting between the kids, the siblings, the 4 of them, my mom being one of them, and the grandkids. And that was a very effective way for them to manage from beyond the grave, wanting to ensure. And again, they didn't have a lot of money, but what they did have, they wanted it to be managed in a way that kept everybody civil. So I think when you start thinking about the emotions of inheritances, the emotions of retirement and coming to the end of your career, and you and I will have been in the seat 30 years next year. That's emotional. Like, I've got some serious emotions about all that, man.
Yeah.
And as much of a joke as we've made, it's emotional. Like, 30 years, it went by so fast. Well, now think about being someone that's the king of an industry, that built a business, had a family, has a family, and now they're coming to the end of the road. That's emotional. And they're going to live, hopefully, a nice, long, long life, but that's emotional. And so it's our job to incorporate that emotional roadmap with that financial one to ensure that the result is a positive one for that individual and that individual's family for many years to come. It's a big deal. Big responsibility, too.
Yeah. So earlier, you mentioned, and I thought that was a really good point when we were going back to the Soto deal, but treating him like he's 50, just in terms of planning. And that's a, really, really smart way to look at it, in timeline in terms of retirement, right? When the income generating is technically going to go off. I mean, this deal takes Juan to 41 years old. Pretty much a baseball career will be done, for all, intents purposes. But, you talk about that, fast forward, right? If he gets to that point, and same thing with any of your clients, and you talk about leaving a legacy, they have that opportunity. You get this sudden influx, and if we're talking serious money here, what could you do in your planning? Just a couple of ideas, simple, without going into right on our discussion right now about deep estate planning, which of course you need to do. But what are some things that they could do to put them in position to enjoy some of the money they've got now and still leave a lasting legacy for generations to come?
Yeah, no, I think it comes back to what we were just talking about. I mean, you have to have an emotional and a financial roadmap discussion about what it is they want to have happen. And I think you can never have that too soon. We've got a client that's going to be coming into quite a bit of money next year, and we've had numerous conversations about what that looks like. And if the money is as big as he thinks or she thinks, or it's lesser, what does that mean? And I think you have to have those big conversations sooner rather than later and say, look, you deserve to celebrate. This was a huge win. Congratulations. What's important to you? And that person may say, I want to take the family on a $500,000 or $1 million vacation and have an unreal experience like we've never had before. Or that individual may say, I want to set aside X amount of money for multiple generations. Like you've heard of the Rockefeller strategy, where John D. Rockefeller wanted to have his heirs be phenomenally wealthy forever. So they literally built something that's now well over 100 years old. I believe it was originally in the late 1800s, 1890s, something like that. I'm sure I'm making a mistake I'm erring on the dates there exactly, but the idea is the same. Rockefeller wanted to have all of his children be extremely wealthy forever. That was something very important to him. So he built, and there's a book out there called, I think it's the Rockefeller Strategy or the Rockefeller Effect, where it speaks to this waterfalling and cascading of assets to ensure that his kids and his kids' kids and his kids' kids' kids would have all of the benefits of his financial wherewithal for many, many generations to come, if not forever. You think about talking back to baseball again, my favorite sport, the Steinbrenners. George, I'm sure, did not want to die in 2010, but what a year to do it, right? No estate tax. And, Hal and his siblings are all billionaires. They run one of the finest sports franchises in the world by far, well-managed, loyal, continuity, consistency of excellence. And it doesn't matter whether you love the Yankees or hate them. I'm a diehard Dodger fan. And for our Red Sox fans out there, I'm sorry also, but you still have to admire the consistency, that go at it winning attitude. And I think that starts from the top down. And while George has got, I've watched every documentary on the Yankees and George Steinbrenner himself. And while you can love him or hate him, the reality of it is there's excellence behind everything that organization tries to do. And I think the Dodgers, my favorite team, are trying to have the same kind of effect now going forward. So I think it's one of those things that I'm sure George, while not planning to die in 2010, the documents, the expectations, the hierarchy of how he wanted to make sure his team was going to be run from beyond the grave was well documented. And Brian Cashman was certainly involved. Similar to the Lakers. Jeannie Buss and Jerry, it was very clear who was going to lead the team, even though the siblings were all going to own part of it. And you never hear from the other siblings anymore. It's just Jeannie's show. So from my perspective, I think it's very important to really have detailed dialogues with your clients, with your friends, with the families, really get to understand what's important. What do they want to have happen? What do they want to have memories that those individuals have, that family has going forward to ensure that all of their hopes and dreams are being met?
It always seems to go back to that, no matter what. And you can look at it when we got started in the business and meeting with people that are just getting started in their professional careers, that were building their businesses, up to people that are selling businesses for, hundreds of millions of dollars, right? It all comes down to that, understanding what's going on, that finding out what's important to them. What do they want? And then going deeper on that and finding out what it is that they really want, right? Because there's another layer to it, and why. And that's where it really leads to why. Like why is it important to you to pay that mortgage if that's what you want? Why is it important to you to leave that legacy, right? Why is it important? That's the driving factor in it. And, it's just funny how everything goes back to that initial consultation, to really finding out what's important to them and why. So
I think you actually, just to close that, I think that you actually hit it on the head, the nail on the head. If you live life without a why, that's not much of a life. If you got all the money in the world and you've got no real why as to what's important and all the meaning behind that, what kind of life is that?
Right.
And I think it's important for us as we enter the holidays here to reflect on what that why is and the meaning behind it. And to be clear going forward in the new year, what that why is. And also, why that why is important. What is driving the decisions and the behavior that's going to get you to where you want to go, whether it be personally, professionally, or financially. So I think it's a great time of year to be thinking about those things.
Absolutely.
Well, I am your host, Jeremy Dicker. If you enjoyed this episode, please click off the like button, and don't forget to subscribe to the One Path to Wealth podcast. Check out our blog online at onewealthmgmt.com. I'm your host, Jeremy Dicker, the Hebrew Hammer, with my co-host, Peter Hoopis. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to One Path to Wealth podcast. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Visit our website at www.onewealthmgmt.com or give us a call at 855-663-9584. And don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of One Wealth Management. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. Investment advisory services offered through One Wealth Capital Management, LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor. insurance solutions offered through One Wealth Management, Financial and Insurance Services, Inc.